Has a question they'd like to ask the panel. Okay, I have a question then.
Oh.
Anybody got one? You've got one right here.
I'm coming. I'm behind. There you go.
This one's for Dr. Heckendorf. I hope I said that right. Please correct me.
No, that's right.
Okay. Dr. Carl? Okay.
Carl's fine.
Okay. I have a question regarding your suggestion to mandate the 840 chips. So, say from the USDA perspective, we have horses that are imported, as I mentioned before, with other country code chips. Would your recommendation then be to double chip the horse?
Absolutely not. And I'll give you an example. We're going to extrapolate here to other species, if you will. But the Canadians, if I remember correctly, it's a 124 chip, and Mexico is 484. But in April of last year, I get a phone call saying, Carl, you got a heifer from Canada, from a ranch in Canada that was just quarantined for rabies. And so this was in April, and supposedly a rabid skunk had been visualized on the premises in January, and then in the 1st of March, a heifer up there died of rabies. So there's quite a incubation time. But in the meantime, two heifers came from Canada to the United States. One went to South Dakota and one went to Colorado to a 70,000 head feedlot. So, oh boy, you know, and actually they had the microchip or the RFID tag wrong. They said it was 224, but it came from Canada. I said, are you sure it was 224 and not 124? Oh yeah, we couldn't read it. So, you know, there's a perfect example. It bailed us out, and we found that heifer in 10 minutes in the feedlot because we had those records. So this is why I think it is so important to have the 840s, the country codes, and this is why I think it's so important to have the national databases. If we wouldn't have had the Canadian national database and we wouldn't had our paperwork coming across with those numbers on, we'd have never found that heifer. And I mean, we were able to find her in 10 minutes and get her isolated. And so that, needless to say, my feedlot guy was very happy he didn't have to quarantine a whole boatload of heifers.
So for clarification, the horses with already existing country code chips, what about horses with manufacturer code prefix chips? Would you then be asking that they be rechipped with the 840 chips? Or a chip that has a country code?
No, I think that we could just go ahead and grandfather them in similar to what they're doing with the cattle. What was it, Neil? After 2015, was it March 1st, 2015? The manufacturer codes were out.
Just for cattle.
Yeah, no.
Manufacturer code tags are recognized as official period.
Yeah, but I do think if we're making some changes, that we could do a similar thing. I think that we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. And if the cattle people have something that the equine people can learn from, let's use it. If the equine people can learn something from the small animal people. Like we're going to have someone from AHA talk, and I'm really anxious to listen to that presentation to see how they manage these databases. But I mean, just like I was showing you on those horses that I microchipped with the emergency management, like I say, I probably could find them, but I'm not real sure what database they're in, and that's why I feel that it's so important.
So let me follow up on that, because I think it's pretty obvious from a regulatory perspective why we would want 840 chips. But I asked the panel from a horse industry perspective, what are the advantages and disadvantages of an 840 chip from the horse industry's perspective?
You want my 2 bits?
Well, I was going to let Angela answer first, but whatever.
Well, I didn't want to give the industry perspective because we have a lot of people in the room that can do that, but I have a little bit of a difference of opinion. I'm really not hung on 840 tags. I feel like if you had any 15-digit unique number, I can work with that. As long as I have some way to search that number and have it tell me which entity houses the data for it. Don't give me the data, but who do I go to that has the information on that unique identifier? To me, it doesn't have to be an 840. In fact, I mean, horses move internationally more than any other livestock species that we have. It's not they go one way for export and they don't come back. They go back and forth all day long. They've come around numerous times. So I don't really feel like the 840 country code does me any good. I don't care if it was born in the U.S. I can find that out no matter what the number is, which country it was born in. So to me, the 840 is not key for what I need it for. I would be perfectly happy with the industry adopting what they need for their standards, as long as I have a way to find out what entity houses the data and I can go and request the information I need after I explain myself and the reason why I'm needing it.
Carl?
Again, if we wouldn't have had the country of origin code, I wouldn't have been able to pick up the mistake on that Canadian heifer. And also, if the ADT rule, which is already in place, addresses the 840. So why make a whole different thing for horses? And again, I think if the more standard and the more similarities and the less variabilities we have, the easier it's going to be. It's just the good old KISS principle.
Okay. Any other questions around the room?
I have a question for all the speakers, but Dr. Stacy touched on it when she talked about technology. And it's kind of a two-part question. But basically, do you think that one of the problems that the equine industry has been facing is basically the merging of the IT industry with the equine industry? For instance, big data is a buzzword, but in data science, there are different types of people, like a data scientist, a database administrator, a programmer, that are all part of a team. And we dealt with this when we built Equicore, and we had 1.5 million horses with microchip IDs, pedigrees, and competition information. But the person who's optimizing the program code for the actual application is different than the database programmer who's optimizing the database and getting it down to 20 gig. And so my question really is, do you feel like the industry will be able to bring in those IT people in order to get those jobs done, those data specialists that can really help the industry understand how to manipulate the data? And then two, is keeping up with technology that's coming out one of the issues? Like, for instance, all of the new cloud computing technology that allows people to host servers much cheaper and provide analytics like IBM has Watson, Dell has EMC, AWS has like 2 or 3, Amazon has 2 or 3, that allow for these high-end machine learning or algorithms to manipulate data. But if, especially with regulatory bodies, by the time they get a regulation passed, they're not up with the technology.
Yeah, I have a comment on this for sure. You heard from 2 states up here today, Colorado and Louisiana, and you both heard that the people who created their databases are long gone, and that the technology that they were left with is the technology they're still using. And in some cases it was still working, and in other cases maybe it wasn't. I can tell you just from a logistics standpoint, state and federal entities, we have the hardest time keeping up with technology. We get the least amount of funding to do it. When we do need to go ask for funding to upgrade a system or a database, it is an act of Congress, almost literally sometimes in my case, to be able to get the funding to do that work and then have that new system actually not become completely obsolete right when we get it in place, right? You guys have seen all of this happen with state and federal government systems, which is why I think for the IT side, the industry is probably in a better position to be more flexible and to keep up with the IT as it comes out, to keep up with the database integration and the improvements, and as the technology changes, move and flex with that capacity. Whereas if you leave it to state and federal systems, while what we have may work for a bit, we've got some challenges that are a little more difficult to deal with than perhaps the industry, and the industry might be a more flexible entity to work through those. So I don't know how others feel about it.
Well, as far as our database, it's not going away. We were told the second part that's on that imaging system is dated. They can no longer print the brand book that's printed every 4 years. So they're scrounging, working with Core 1, seeing about getting the brand days book printed. However, our database is fine right now, and the IT guy that I am using sort of kind of knows it. He even told me if I got stumped, I could call him. So if anybody really wants to know something about the database, they can call us and we can talk to them. But as far as expanding, going to a better searchable database like are out there now, we'd have to look at the cost, benefit, effectiveness, and like Angela said, we're probably not going to ever upgrade our database because of cost constraints. Now, I say that, but it's invaluable to our state during a disaster. So again, if we had some funding through the disaster people or wrote a grant, maybe a disaster or response grant, and then we could fund some changes, we might do it, but I still doubt then. I tend to agree that the private industry, I'm already talking to Dr. Wade about his database that I would like very much to learn more about, because we're probably not going to upgrade ours.
I guess from Angela, in part to answer your comments, we had a private company, then we went to the state people, and now we deal with herds. And, I guess it's like veterinary medicine. We're still practicing. One of these days we'll learn how to get it right. But I think you just need to, if you're going to go to a private company, you need to really research your private company, because as we all know, there are a lot of IT companies out there that claim to know everything and can do you a really good job. You got to be careful. The only good part about government is it may not be as efficient, but it kind of plugs along and it'll still be there. And that's from a conservative.
I'd like to make just a comment there. We have enough backyard horses in Utah that are not associated with any association. Unless it's a state or a government-regulated mandatory microchipping, it's not going to happen with a lot of those horses. And so that's one of the issues and one of the problems.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I mean, one of the things that I really believe is that this is a process. This is a changing of what is normal in the industry. I don't expect to have backyard horses microchipped in the next 10 years or maybe even 20. But what I'd like to see is this industry movement and industry standardization where in order to do things in the industry, you have to kind of have one to do what you want to do if you chose to do it, which makes it really acceptable as a non-threatening type thing that, hey, what do you have to do if you want to go to a show? Well, I got to get a Coggins test, right? How do you think we got millions of horses a year Coggins tested in the U.S.? Somebody somewhere wanted to take their pony to Pony Club. And guess what? It had to cross state lines. And oh my God, for the first time, we taught a 10-year-old girl that her pony needs a Coggins test to go from state A to state B. And it became an accepted understanding that this is part of the industry in which I move and shake. And I foresee microchipping as that type of movement. I do not expect the backyard horses to follow that movement right away, but I think there's a lot of opportunities with a lot of the programs and the initiatives that have been mentioned that over time it will become a normal thing in the industry, and the people who want to play will get on board, and eventually it's going to be an accepted practice, and we're going to have very few that aren't chipped just because that's what you do. And that's the future that I'm looking towards. I'm not looking to be able to do perfect epidemiology based on tracking of microchips tomorrow, because I'm trying it right now, guys, and it sucks. You're going to be shocked at some of the things that I tell you about tomorrow. But I foresee the movement, and I foresee the industry groups that are here that have been part of the industry and leading the industry for a very, very long time. I see you guys as the initiators of what the future should look like to make the industry better. And I think people will eventually follow along. And it's not going to be perfect, but I think it's going to be a lot better than it is now.
I totally agree. I don't think every horse on the front range of the Wasatch Mountains doesn't need to be microchipped, for heaven's sake. But if there's 4 or 5 guys on the ranch that are going team roping into Idaho or Wyoming, those horses need to be microchipped because they're moving and they're a higher risk.
Well, my perspective on that is if Louisiana can mandate it, I can't imagine any state not being able to do it. And again, at first there was pushback, but I mean, it's second nature now. You got to get a microchip, you got to get your horse EIA tested. And yes, the testing numbers have gone down as the number of horses have gone down and the economy's gone down, but it's just a fact of life. And like I said, I was shocked that other states did not do it. And we pushed it from the perspective of theft, protection, reunification. We've got 2 illustrious kill pins in Louisiana, and identifying some horses that ended up at the livestock markets and bought at the kill pins. We've reunified some stolen horses with their owners. So when you present it that way as a benefit to the owner, we really haven't had a problem. Like I said, the problem in our state initially was the industry not wanting. It slowed them damn racehorses down.
May I have your opinions on the potential for integrating databases or developing them so that they are interoperable with public safety and other real-time data management tools, which might apply to multiple purviews, whether it be wildland urban response and wildfires, whether it be disaster management, whether it be theft and interstate movement. Has anyone considered the possibility of integrating with law enforcement or other local emergency management tools for your jurisdictions?
Does anybody up there want to answer that?
I have never thought of that, but I dig the idea. I think anything that we can piggyback on that already exists is a win for this group. I mean, you guys are building your own initiatives, but there's nothing that prevents you from using a pathway or a structure or an infrastructure that's already there. So I think that's a great suggestion to explore. The only thing that I was looking at, and I'm thrilled to get to hear the AHA experience with it is how did they get that online search tool for the small animal stuff? I'm really, really interested in how did they integrate, because that's lots of different clinics, lots of different manufacturers, lots of different sign-up, look-up, registration sites for all of those types of chips. So I'm really interested to hear about how they built that, because I think that that's an existing structure that we could use as well. But I mean, I love these types of new suggestions on infrastructure that's already there, that's being used with high-level data, that's very well protected, obviously, and very well managed. I mean, we should take a look at that and figure out how did they do it, and can we do the same?
Good, Dr. Fly.
I have a question for Dr. Heckendorf. This is Dave Fly, New Mexico. Carl, I understand your wife doesn't brand her horses, and you don't get papers to travel, but, and so the next time your racehorse comes to New Mexico, I'll be sure and check it. But what is Keith doing, since I know your database is kaput, you said, what are you doing at the state level for data storage?
Let Alex answer.
Well, that's for a later question. That's fine.
Looking at Alex. Here you go, Alex. Thanks.
I think Carl's system that he had shown up there, while that specific database to house those specific horses is tough to retrieve. We use USA Herds as our traceability database and management system in Colorado, and that does allow us a great deal of flexibility. It's a product with computer-aided incorporated that we use because when we, as a state, looked at the livestock entities in Colorado and we're looking at which system to use and suggested maybe we should use a USDA or a federal system, our Cattlemen's Association flipped. So did the Dairy Association. So the livestock producers and owners in Colorado weren't going to have it, but as the state with USA Herds as the tool we're using, all that data is managed as state data, and they were okay with that. So in an emergency management situation, for those horses, can I get those specific ID numbers like you saw on that card? That one we're going to check in a couple of places that we're going to have to look a little harder for, but can we find the CVIs that those horses traveled into National Western Stock Show? We sure can. And can we find the animals listed on them? Because the National Western requires official ID on its livestock, I can find the 840 numbers for all the cattle that are over there when those CVIs are in our system. I don't have 840 numbers I can track down for the horses, so I can't find like Lena's Little Oak nearly as easily. But I can track down the health certificate that they traveled on. So that's what we have. So I don't want to make it sound like we don't have any data solutions for that, because we certainly do.
I'll just piggyback real quick because it's my next to last day of being the EPI here in Colorado. So we do actually duplicate in Colorado. We use Core 1 or SCS. And we started back when Sonny was my boss, putting in every single Coggins test that came to us. So every 1011 got put into SCS. So much like the Louisiana system, we were scanning them. The actual paper was, scanned into SCS. If we had a microchip, it's even easier because then you query on SCS and you can tell what different herds, what different owners that animal has been in. So that's a nice thing, and it's very, very easy to do. I know everybody in the USDA and a lot of people are like, she just drank way too much SCS Kool-Aid. But it really does work. It is a little bit labor intensive, but I had a blind deaf lady doing it, so doing the data entry. So I know it can be done. And it is a system that we do have here in Colorado that is kind of a backup, because Alex and I are always together going, hey, if you don't have it, he goes, Talani, do you have it? And I'm like, yeah, I probably have it. Piggybacking on that, I just wanted to make a comment that, I'm all about the microchips. I know, Angela said she doesn't think backyard horses do, but coming from the tribal aspect of down in New Mexico, which is kind of part of what I'm moving on to, our tribes, our reservations have become dumping grounds for horses that nobody wants. And so like on my reservation in New Mexico, I'm trying to push for the owned horses, the backyard-owned horses, to have that microchip, because then I can tell when some non-tribal member has dumped their horses on my land, because then I go and I scan it, and our tribal animal control officers can tell, hey, this isn't one of our tribal horses. And so then we are trying to get rid of them that way, because all across the West, our tribal reservations are the dumping grounds for unwanted horses, and we don't have the resources for them. So I think that the microchipping is definitely a way to go.
Other questions?
Or comments?
So I have a question for Dr. Stacy. So it's mandatory in Louisiana that you microchip all the horses and Coggins test them.
Well, microchip, brand, or tattoo, permanent ID.
Right. But there's a lot of horses that never go to town. How do you reach those horses?
Well, back in the day when we had a lot more people before state cutbacks, we actually sent people out door to door. And they asked for their Coggins test, and if they didn't have them, they were required to get it and to get chipped. Now, that was before my time, and I don't know if that's where we gave them a discounted chip or if they had to get it with their private vet. But back in the day, when we were first doing the mandatory ID, we actually sent teams of people out and went door to door looking for the horses. We looked at the extension numbers and the NAS numbers, where to go. We kind of concentrated on the horse areas, and we did go out and look for them. So then we did, like I said, the chip-a-thons at all the congregation points. So at Christmas parades, at bush tracks, wherever horses congregated, our people went and they started asking for their paperwork. So we tried to enforce it that way, but we know fewer and fewer people are testing, so it seems to be the same people every year that are going interstate or going to events that are testing. So we are missing some that just aren't testing anymore. Now, if they were to go get tested, then, or like if they go to the livestock market, when we rounded up some of our feral horses, we found 4 out of 9 that were positive. So if they go to one of our livestock markets for sale, then they have to be tested before they're sold.
Okay. So who do you all, I've got a few questions here, so who do you all think should insert, we got one up here, go ahead.
Real quick to piggyback on that, do you still see the program as a success if you don't have 100% participation?
Yes.
Okay. And I mean, any other program in the future, Angela, that would still be, without 100% participation, it'd still be successful?
I think we just got to get participation, Cliff. I mean, we've got to start getting more numbers and more information recorded, and the right information recorded. I mean, this is not necessarily, I mean, you hear from state and federal folks, the type of information that we want is very limited amounts of information. It's not near what breed registries or disciplines collect and maintain for the purposes of competition or DNA or heritage or breeding. We have a very limited amount of information that we need to do our job, whether it's for traceback or for natural disaster recovery or for a state program that was put in place. I mean, you saw Diane's 4 or 5 searchable fields, right? That's the information that she needed to be able to find that 1011 paper and that EIA test. So, I mean, our needs for data are pretty small. The trick is getting more participation and getting at least that minimum amount of data available is kind of, we need that to start rolling. And I think any improvement year to year would be considered a success. I still say, and I didn't say that I didn't think any backyard horses would be chipped. Mine are all backyard, they're all chipped. There you go. But I really feel like we don't need 100% of U.S. horses, whether it's 6 million or 9 million or however many we've decided this week we have, somewhere between 6 and 9 million. I don't think we're going to get all of those chipped, but I think over time we're going to get a higher percentage identified and data on them. And as their life cycle goes through, the new generations coming behind them are going to have a higher percentage of participation year after year after year. And I think that's the success we're looking for.
And we are still looking out for our untested populations. I do have to mention this, that we have our trespass horses at Fort Polk military base. And they've sequentially grown from about 40 horses to almost 800 horses over the years. So we are rounding up, placing these horses with the humane groups, and we are testing. And Angela Pelzel's program has picked up the testing for EP and EIA. So we've had 2 rounds of feral horses. They're not calling them abandoned horses. They're not subject to the Bureau of Land Management. They're trespass horses. So they are being rounded up, going to humane groups so that they won't go to the stockyards and end up at kill. But these horses are being microchipped, so we've got a catalog of these horses. We are wanding them first to see if they have previous microchips, and so far none of them have. But we are trying to reach out and expand our program to the untested populations.
I think Cliff had a really good point, is what is success? And, what percentage do we expect to microchip? Is there any organization or discipline or breed group that wants to respond to that they've thought that through to decide what success is looking like? Okay. Nope. Might be something to look forward in the future to our tomorrow's discussion of what is success. What are we going forward? Oh, there you go. I knew I could count on you.
Love that microphone. For USHJ, it's 100%. I mean, that's our rule. That's how we're going to roll. And for USDF, undecided.
Any other comments? So again, that's something that we might want to bring up on our to-do list tomorrow. Oh, somebody waved.
Right here.
Okay.
Just a small point. I think sometimes success might mean something different than what would good look like. If we think about progress, making progress toward these goals, not necessarily perfection, because it's going to take quite a bit of time. So making some interim goals or some, what would better look like, what would good look like, what would super success look like. I think having some progressive viewpoints might help keep things in perspective.
Back here, Katie.
One thing I would consider a big success is we could look at an 840 ID or a manufacturer ID, and whether it be cattle or horses, and be able to find an individual that tag was actually issued to. Because right now it's kind of a black hole.
So success is looking at how we've progressed. So think about that then. How are we going to progress, and what are our looking at good, bad things moving forward?
All righty. Any other questions? If not, I've got one. So let's talk about who inserts the microchip, because we'll find tomorrow, and the small animal people are here, that some states require a veterinarian apply the microchip for a small animal. I'm not aware of any that require it for horses. Maybe they are. I don't know. But who do you all think should be allowed to microchip horses, and then who should be allowed to register or report that microchip either to the breed or a central database or whatever we end up with?
In Louisiana, the Louisiana Board of Veterinary Medicine has said that it is a veterinary procedure. So a veterinarian has to apply the chip, at least in small animals, or a technician, an RVT, under veterinary supervision can do it. And the technicians do a lot of the microchipping. In large animals, I would imagine it's the same. The veterinarians, it is considered a veterinary procedure.
Florida's the same way. Any other states? Anybody aware of any other states?
I think it generally follows the code of veterinary practice for that individual state. So I think you kind of have to look at what each state considers veterinary medicine, practice of veterinary medicine. I guess one of the things that I thought about while sitting here and listening to this morning's session was, we have registered lip tattooers, right? We have an entire system that's built on lip tattooers that have been trained, certified, and their industry standard used. In the states that would allow it or would be open to it, I can certainly foresee having official identifiers available to be able to do that practice if it's allowed under the state law covering the veterinary practice. But I think it's something that needs to be considered.
Yeah. In the states that I am licensed, which New York, it is a practice of veterinary medicine, and Texas is not. I know that California is not as well, but I agree that this would need to be at least under indirect supervision of a vet to be able to do that, or have a training procedure done to certain individuals or technicians or similar.
Marta, over here.
Well, and I think it may get more complicated than that, because in many states in the United States, even if something is considered veterinary medicine, if you're doing it on your own animal, or if you are a full-time employee of the person who owns that animal, you can still perform that procedure.
I think in most states, if you own cattle or a horse that's sick, you can treat your own animal. So I guess I have to do a little research, see if this would fall under that or if it falls under the Veterinary Act. Right? I know there are a lot of horses that the owners are microchipping them and sending in their numbers today.
Well, there's probably some owners that can microchip a horse better than some of us DVMs up here. So, I mean, you kind of have to take a look at, what's available and acceptable to the states that have laws either for or against it. But that brings up a really good point. I mean, that's another thing to contend with. Maybe it takes, several years of us noting issues with lay people inserting chips before people come to some sort of a consensus about how that should be done. I mean, that's what it took for the practice of lay dental work in some states. It took issues in those states that passed a Veterinary Practice Act that included dentals on horses as a veterinary practice. It took them having issues with those lay dentals before they put some things in place, and maybe that's what this would take, but it certainly needs some research and some in-depth look at, what do the state's laws currently say about that, and how difficult would it be to do something different than what most of them do.
Well, and I may have misinterpreted the question, but tied to that question was who can put them in and who can register them. And I think that's one of our, I don't think we're as concerned about owners or lay people putting these in, is that we want to make sure that when one goes in that it's properly registered. And that's going to be the catch. If we restrict it too much to 840s and make it, you have to get a Prem ID and you have to jump through all these hoops, how many people are going to put the ID in? And if we make those chips available for anybody, they may be in all the horses, but then how many of them will be registered and what kind of traceability will we have? So there's going to be a balance between that, and I think that's going to be the key, is figuring out. There's been many speakers here today that have said that this is going to be industry driven, and if we look at the majority of animals that now have RFIDs, I think that's proof of it, right? It's breed registries and competitions. And so the stragglers, the backyard horses that is 10 years, as you said, before they have an RFID, that's fine. But the ones that do, how are we going to make it easy for them? And then how are we going to make sure that it gets properly registered? And then how are we going to have an index system to find where that information is stored, what silo to look in?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So that's our problem today, actually, is we've got a lot of chips in horses that go nowhere. because it didn't get registered, or in some cases it was supposed to get registered and it never made it to Diane over here, despite the fact that the private practitioner was following the law and was doing everything correct up to the point where it was send that information into the state so it can go in the database, and that's where it went to die. So, I mean, you've hit it right on the head. That's exactly what we have today, and I'm not sure. Those are probably not fixable from here forward unless we encounter those chipped horses for another purpose where it can get into a system and registered properly. But I think going forward from the new chips going in, that's definitely the question to address, more so than who puts it in, is how do we get that information where it's supposed to go so that it can be used.
Any other questions? Comments?
I have a comment, Thatch. I think that's one of the reasons why I believe the 840s are positive approach, because just like in cattle, we know where that 840 tag's going.
Neil and I had a discussion on that earlier, and we've got really good 840 traceability on our cattle, mostly because of the paperwork, the CVIs, the vaccinations, those test records. But if we really go to our 840 distribution records, there's more holes there than you think.
There may be, but it's a start. You know, we're learning, and
is where I fall back on the industry as being a big driver. I'll bet you that if you go to AQHA and if you go to Hunter Jumper Association, you go to the Jockey Club, you will find almost no chips that aren't properly registered. And it's because of the approach that they've taken. It's part of the system. Putting it, you can't register your horse without having that chip. And so that's where our success has been. How do we build similar systems outside of that? Do we turn to entities like, and forgive me not mentioning everyone out there, but Global VetLink? Do we insist that that somehow we know those 840 numbers that have gone into their system, so that if we got to look in their silo, we can? If we have other Coggins testing entities out there, I was talking about CVIs, but if Coggins testing has an 840 that's in a database, whether it's a limb system, do we have an ability to tap into that silo so we can search those silos? The big challenge is going to be find a way to voluntarily get that, just like with the pets, the animals, is to get that into an AHA type database. But until then, there are existing silos where that 840 number or that 900 series number is already going into something, but we have no way of finding that, and we have no way of knowing that silo's even there.
And I think that's just exactly what this meeting is for. Tomorrow, hopefully, in our working groups, we will establish, or our breakout session, we will establish working groups that can address that issue. How do we register these? If it's an 840, who registers what? How is that protocol handled? If it's a 900 series, how is that protocol handled? And get a handle on an actual deliverable, an action point.
There are databases. If you chip a horse, there are databases that you can go in, other than the breeds, and register that horse. Now, I don't know how well there's several of them, how well they interact. And if someone's trying to find that horse, if they had the horse and they're trying to find the owner, I don't know how easy that is. But they're out there right now. I guess they need to be coordinated a bit, huh?
So what I've found is that they don't interact. And you're right, that individual group or entity, AVID and others, the person did fill it. I did this 15, 20 years ago. I filled out the little AVID form and I sent it in, and my horse is registered with AVID. But I don't have a way to search that, and I'm the owner that has all the information about the horse, and there's been nothing from me to them to update any of that information. There's been nothing from them to me to attempt to double check and see that I'm the correct person with that horse. None of those things really exist. And what I'm faced with now when I have random horse A wearing a microchip with this 15-digit number is every time, if I don't know the entity that that chip belongs to, and I usually don't, I have to start with the manufacturer. And I go person, by distributor, by vet company, by person, by clinic, by state, to try to see if I can get to the end holder of the data. And it's pretty rough right now. It doesn't really get me there. So while we do have a process by which you can start to trace it with the manufacturers, finding the actual information and who houses it right now is kind of a black hole. And shouldn't that be the easiest part, right? To find who is the one entity that has the data, the reason that the horse got chipped. Who is the reason that the horse got chipped? And we can't even do that right now unless I have some prior knowledge of why that animal was chipped or some guess at what entity might house the data, and I can go ask and check. But it's pretty rugged right now. And so that network you're talking about, Tom, between some of the entities, the network between the silos, I don't believe has even been approached just yet.
Yeah, we've got a question back here, and then we'll get to Summer next.
I'm going to play the devil's advocate for a minute. And I guess understanding that I'm kind of coming late to the whole identification game, but from sitting around and listening today, I think there's two pretty clear delineations. There's first providing each horse an individual identity, which a microchip in every horse would do. And then there's the second part of what to do with that identification. Is it simply enough that each horse is identified, or does the whole program need to be identify your horse, register your horse, there's actual information on your horse? And I think I don't even know if there's anything really to address, but there's two pretty clear delineations in my opinion, and before making a plan, I think those two things need to be addressed on just what's the overall goal.
Okay, Summer, any comment?
So mine's a little bit more of a comment. I think it's a great time for this because, as you guys have already mentioned before, the industry is very flexible right now to adopt it. And at the same time, it's coming right at the point in time where technology is also very flexible. I think trying to do this 6 years ago or even a few years ago perhaps would have called for everyone conforming to the same type of database, which would affect their processes in-house and their organizations. However, I can speak from experience with our platform. We're currently working with 4 different sources of information, 1.5 million horses, and we're already cross-comparing and verifying microchip numbers between those sources. And what we're finding is that multiple sources have these chip numbers. Oftentimes, the breed organization has it, a sports organization has it, perhaps even the international FEI has it. And so along that timeline, if you could intersect, regardless of who designs the platform, you can relate in the microchip manufacturers, the vet they issued that batch number to, could be a starting point. But what we've also found is that some of the problem with the current microchip databases is that the original owner that chips the horse inputs the owner's information, but then they sell the horse, that record's not updated. So I think in us discussing data solutions, it's really important to have the concept of cross-verification and algorithms used to match those data fields. And I can tell you that the data we've received has come in from everything from a Word document all the way to Excel spreadsheets, CSVs, MySQL, to custom platforms. So the technology is out there where we can communicate with each other and not require everyone to change their organizational processes or even their current database structures. And I think that's really also important for everyone to know.
All right. Any more questions, comments, thoughts?
I'll just expand on that. The technology, for that integration is there. The hard part is just getting that first step, just getting that chip registered. And we keep coming back to that. And I think about the veterinarians. We had an MCI trace that went back to a state I won't mention, and the veterinarian had, last time they brucellosis tested, they used management ID instead of official ID, and so we dead-ended on that trace. We have veterinarians that people have mentioned already, they didn't send in, they did everything right but didn't send in the records. Angela talked about her AVID card that she sent in, and I think mine never even got sent in. And so it's a matter of convenience. And Barry made a comment much earlier about the smartphones and the generation we're in. I challenge the tag manufacturing companies to come out, each one of you, with an app. And when that chip goes in, you barcode scan. You don't need a fancy RFID reader. You barcode scan that barcode label that comes with the chip. You put in your email address and whatever information you choose to, and it sends it to your database, and there's a silo. Right? And the veterinarian can do it, the owner can do it, anybody with their smartphone can immediately register that chip without having to mail it, without having to write it down, without having to read it. They scan it, and they send it.
Good point. All righty. Let's give our panel a hand.